All right, let's get into it. There were a lot of questions, Ryan, going into this game. Tons of questions from, is Jake Moody any good? The run defense, how prepared are they going to be? Who's opposite of Bosa? What's that going to look like? Overall, how do you feel about those questions? What questions were answered for you, and maybe what questions are still left unanswered for you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot, but Jake Moody is the biggest question answered to me. Like off top, like I was worried about Jake Moody. Like, what was he going to look like? He didn't look good in the preseason, and he came out and answered, man. So that makes me feel a whole lot better. I was concerned about that, and hopefully it continues. And yeah, so that's a big one off the top that makes me feel a lot better. I mean, there's so many other ones. I think the biggest one outside of that was Brock Purdy. Like, is he going to look worse? Is he going to look the same? Is he going to look better? I think he looks better than he did last year, which is remarkable coming off that UCL injury. Great to see Brock Purdy. Another question was Colton McKivitz. That one I'm still a little out on. We need to see more, I think, because TJ Watt is a tough opponent for anybody. But that one is still TBD, I think. I mean, I can keep going, but maybe I should give you a couple.
I think when we get to some areas of opportunity, for sure, we'll definitely talk about Colton McKivitz. I have a different take when it comes to McKivitz, maybe a different take than what I'm seeing a lot of other people have. But as far as the questions that were answered, okay, so I'll just give you all the things that I was asking before the game, which was, how can we trust Jake Moody going into this game, knowing that everything he did in the preseason was rough? And then when it came down to the final preseason game, he didn't even play. So we heard that Pittsburgh was a tough place to kick. I'm like, oh gosh, like I just hope that it works out for him. And it did. I mean, he couldn't have been any better. And I'm so happy for him, because it was really one of those situations, and people can say what they want, but kickers are not guys that you give years to develop. They either are or they are not. And once they start to get the yips, you got to just be done with them. And if he had come out this game and, let's say, missed 2 field goals and an extra point, or just looked awful, they could not continue to ride with them. They can't. They could not take that risk in a win now season. So I am happy for Moody that not only did he not have the yips, but he was perfect, not from a percentage standpoint, but literally every kick right down the middle. And what's crazy is pregame, he was missing a lot of kicks. And I was like, oh gosh, I don't know how this is going to go. And Nick, who just left the super chat, he's the one that brought it to my attention. He's like, you see him shanking these things? And so I started watching, I'm like, yeah, he's kind of shanking these. So we were a little worried. Like, he had every reason to fold, and he didn't. And I love that for him. I'm so happy for Jake Moody. I was curious, though. One of the big points of getting Jake Moody early that people talked about was he should be there for kickoffs, and he didn't even kick off. So I don't know if that was because he was injured or if they just prefer Mitch. Either way, happy for Jake Moody. That was a big question mark. Another question mark, run defense. What would it look like? They struggled in the preseason. We know that Javon Hargrave is not the best run defender. And they answered the question. Yes, they can defend the run still. They're going to be okay, or at least early on. We'll see what it looks like, progressively throughout the season. I don't want to overreact, but it was a question mark. And at least for week 1, that question got answered. They're fine there.
Yeah.
Another question was preparedness. We talked about, and I think almost everybody that makes content for the 49ers was wrong about this game in one way or another, myself included, which is I picked them to win. Some people didn't, but I did pick them to win. So I'll take credit there, I guess. But I was still so wrong on how that game was going to be played out. And one of the things that I think a lot of us talked about and pointed to was, first of all, 49ers are traveling cross country. Yeah. They're going into a hostile environment. They're playing a Mike Tomlin coached team, which is always prepared, especially week 1. Right. And a team that played their starters in all 3 preseason games. Like, if a team was going to be prepared, it was going to be the Steelers. And I don't know how good the Steelers are or are not, Ryan. But one thing I do know is that they were going to be prepared, or so I thought. And maybe they were, and the 49ers are just that much better. But The 49ers were the team that played with desperation. The 49ers were the team that punched in the mouth first. The 49ers were the team that looked ultra prepared. And it was just an unknown because we didn't really get to see a lot of it in the preseason. We didn't know for sure what it would look like. And it couldn't, I mean, it really almost couldn't have looked any better. So that question was answered. And then I think the last question for me was, who's opposite of Bosa and what's that going to look like? Well, so far so good. Drake Jackson is coming into his own. He's a freak athlete. We know that. And yes, he got 3 sacks. I think a lot of those were kind of a product of pressures from other people. But either way, the fact that he was able to clean up and also the way that he flattens out along the line, I think his athleticism and the way that he plays mobile quarterbacks potentially could be a difference maker. One thing that we talked about with this team for so many years is, can they contain mobile quarterbacks? I think Drake Jackson might change that narrative for them. I really do believe that, because just the way that he played against Pickett and was able to corral him whenever he wanted, and just his overall athleticism, he might be the reason why mobile quarterbacks aren't able to do what we're kind of used to them seeing prior to this year. So I was extremely ecstatic about those questions being answered this week for me.
Yeah, there are a lot of them. Drake Jackson, man, I think he's not getting quite enough credit. Yes, he was able to clean up, but man, that guy's so athletic. He chased a couple guys down.
Yeah,
it's not just like he was right there and the quarterback just came to him. He went and got those guys. So shout out to Drake Jackson, because I think he is. People all offseason have been saying, what are they going to do at the end? What are they going to do at the end? And I'll toot my horn here. I said that Drake Jackson is going to step up, and I think the Niners believe in him, and that's why they're not going after another DN. And he looked great, so that was great to see as well. I mean, there are a ton of questions. Steve Wilkes was a question for me. Like, is he going to be on his P's and Q's from the jump, or is it going to take some time? Like, I think on Tuesday when I was with you, I thought the Steelers going to win. I changed my opinion on Wednesday. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I said Niners going to win, but I thought it was going to be close. And I was concerned about Steve Wilkes and his play calling, just being on top of it from the beginning and having some time to adjust. But that wasn't an issue. I don't know if it's just the 49ers defense is just so damn good that part is really unimportant. But the 49ers defense looked phenomenal. I think they're going to be better this year. And a lot of the reason is because of, for one, I think Drake Jackson looks good. And then 2, Hargrave and Armstead next to each other in the interior is tough, man. Inside pressure, we haven't seen that since Buckner left on the 49ers, and that makes a huge difference. I think Nick Bosa and Drake Jackson are going to eat all year because of the pressure that's coming up the middle and forcing those quarterbacks to run outside.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. And I don't really the other thing, a lot of people, obviously the quarterback position has been talked about all offseason. Right. And for me, on Thursday when I talked with Larry and Vish, we talked about our expectations for Brock Purdy. And my expectations were, just look like you did last year. Please just look as good as you did last year. I don't need you to go and do crazy stuff or play out of your mind, because the expectation for Purdy was, he's got to make all these leaps. And I think throughout the year, we've got to see the improvement. But the whole thing is, he didn't have an offseason to improve. He had an offseason to rehab. And so for me, if he looked as good as he did last year, I'm good with that, especially week 1. And I think he looked to me exactly like he did last year. And that's not a knock. That's a good thing, because last year it was good enough to go to an NFC championship. And maybe if he was able to play against the Eagles, we don't know how that would have ended, but maybe they could have beaten the Eagles. Maybe they could have competed in a Super Bowl. That's a question that we don't know the answer to, but we feel a lot better knowing that he looks every bit as good as he did last year early on. And that means he can only ascend from here. He can only improve from here. He didn't get that offseason to improve. He was forced to rehab all offseason. Now that he's playing again, and at least the starting point to me is even with what it was last year, which is a great thing. It can only go up from here is what the hope is. So I said that Purdy played well. We'll talk about it. Yeah. I personally think he was basically the same guy. And again, that is not a knock. That is a positive. And after the game, in my post game, I said Brock Purdy looked phenomenal. And what I meant by that was he met every expectation that I had for him. And that made me feel good about the situation. It made me feel very comfortable about the quarterback situation and knowing that we're in good hands. And hopefully we can see it, get better from here because he hasn't reached his ceiling.